G'day, Warbles on a lot here from Aero Hillbilly Enterprises. Now that's either Aerophysics Engineering Research and Operations or it's Alternative Energy Realistic Options. This is another clip in the SunFoil series. This is SunFoil Frequently Asked Questions and Answers. And one of the most frequently asked questions is, why do you call it a SunFoil? Capital S, capital F, but squashed together as one word. Well, if you were to draw a line halfway between the top surface and the bottom surface, from the leading edge, you would find you've got three straight lines making a curve. It is an aerofoil, a faceted aerofoil. It's called a SunFoil because it runs on sunlight, because it's got a photovoltaic solar electric panel that it's built around. I haven't yet met anybody who didn't understand why the solar panel needs to be streamlined if it's going to be mounted on the roof of a car that regularly spends 3/4 of its time with the motor running doing 100 kilometres an hour up the highway. Everybody understands it has to be streamlined. A lot of people say, why do you want a solar panel permanently fixed to the roof of your car? And the answer is, I fitted a solar panel to the roof of my car because my average engine run time is about 6 to 8 minutes. I live 15 kilometres out of town, and the electrical system in my car as it left the factory was a piston-engine petrol burning electrical system, and the alternator has a regulator which looks at the battery voltage and assumes that it's going to have 45 minutes to deliver a profiled tapered charge to the battery. So my battery was never ever being fully recharged, and the alternator was permanently running at say 25 to 35% output. Okay, we'll try that with a schematic. The only way to get any electricity into the battery is to buy fuel, set fire to it in the combustion chamber so the hot gas can push the piston to make the connecting rod turn the crankshaft and put torque or twistiness into the shaft. The twistiness then has to go into a belt, and the belt speeds up the twistiness to take it to the alternator. The alternator is 50% efficient, so to get 1 horsepower of sparkliness you have to put 2 horsepower of twisties into that pulley. And it is in fact a 50 amp or 1 horsepower output alternator. However, because the alternator runs at twice crankshaft speed, that 2 horsepower just became 4 horsepower, and because the belt is 50% efficient, it loses half the power it transmits. So we now need 8 horsepower of torque or twistiness coming out of the crankshaft to get 1 horsepower of electricity into the battery. Now, 8 horsepower coming from a 60 horsepower engine. But the engine doesn't make its 60 horsepower until up around 3,000 revolutions per minute. And if I'm in town with the engine idling at 1,000 RPM, and if I've got a 25% flat battery, so 2 horsepower is going into the belt, there's only 1 horsepower available for the gearbox to turn the wheels with. Therefore, to drive around at 40 kilometres an hour going uphill in front of the primary school in the local town, Glen Innes, I used to have to go down to 3rd gear, because 1 horsepower was not enough to drive at 40 kilometres an hour. Once I retrofitted the car with a piston solar electric hybrid electrical system so that the solar panel is the primary method of charging the battery. The panel can provide the daily recharge to compensate for sulfation and static systems drain in 2 hours of sunlight or 10 hours of a rainy day. So the battery's full. The alternator is functioning purely as a turnaround pulley for the water pump drive. At idle, I've got 3 horsepower at 1,000 RPM, and I can drive around the town in top gear, low RPM, low fuel consumption, all because the solar panel has filled the battery. So I've got effectively 300% more torque around town at idle. But if my alternator was at full output, if I had 8 horsepower going into the drive belt, I would have nearly 1,300% more power to drive with at idle, because I wouldn't have been able to drive at idle. The auto choke would have been pulling 15 or 1600 RPM in order to get the torque to drive the alternator, and I'd have to rev the guts out of the car in order to start driving. This is why the little old lady who only drives the car once a week kangaroo hops up the road in a cloud of blue smoke with the choke full on, and she can't get out of second gear. Her battery has been sulfating since last time she drove the car. The alternator's at full output, and she hasn't got enough torque at low RPM to drive the alternator and the gearbox, so she kangaroo hops. To push my car around at 50 kilometres an hour or 30 miles an hour, it only takes 5 horsepower of torque. As speed doubles, drag squares. So to do 100 kilometres an hour or 60 miles per hour, it takes 25 horsepower. At 125 kilometres an hour, you need 50 horsepower, and at 135 you need 60 horsepower. When this thing was new to me 10 years ago, I couldn't get it to do any more than 125 kilometres an hour on a flat level road. A couple of weeks ago, at night mind you, with the headlights on, I saw 135 kilometres an hour sustained for 10 kilometres an hour, and the truck who annoyed me pulled off the road and left me alone. Because with a full battery on the highway, I've got anywhere between 3.3 and 13.3% more torque available from the same engine to drive the wheels instead of the 3% fuel efficient electrical system. The next frequently asked question, have I replaced the alternator or taken it out? No, the alternator has to be there for the headlights at the traffic lights at night time or the windscreen wipers on a rainy day. The alternator also has to be there as a turnaround pulley for your water pump for the cooling of the engine. So leave the alternator where it is. It's got a regulator, and the regulator will vary the output and therefore the drag loading of the alternator's drive belt according to the battery's needs. The alternator stays. The solar electric system is there to compensate for the battery's sulfation. It's going to lose 1% of its capacity per day that it just sits there connected to nothing. However, it's not connected to nothing. While your car's in the parking lot, its battery is feeding the dashboard clock, so it knows what time it is when you switch the ignition on. It's going to feed the stereo's memory chip, so it remembers what radio station you were listening to. If you've got an engine management computer, that's going to be sucking as well. And if you've got a burglar alarm, that will also be drawing power. Central locking is another thing that can suck power. If you have a little old car with not much of an electrical system, like this one, it needs 3.68 amp hours per day to recharge the battery for 24 hours sitting in the car park. Because of the drive belt and all the other inefficiencies, this car burns 207 mils of petrol per amp hour, so it's 761 mils of petrol per day that it's been sitting in the car park, and the electrical system will take that out of your fuel tank next time you start the engine. So this thing is saving 5.3 litres a week, whether I drive at 50 kilometres a week or 500 kilometres a week. Next frequently asked question is, how do you know that? Well, because I started keeping a fuel log 10 years ago when I bought the car. So cruising at 90 kilometres an hour in August 2008, 9.39 kilometres per litre. 8.75 kilometres to the litre, 9.46 kilometres to the litre. And then I mounted the first SunFoil and started to get pretty obsessive about it. And looking, 10.38, 10.76 kilometres to the litre. But I got a bit sick of driving at 90 kilometres per hour, which was making me something of a moving traffic block. So I had to go at cruising at 100 kilometres per hour and found that with 10% higher road speed, I was getting better fuel economy than before I fitted the lumpy old Mark 1 to the roof. And the Mark 1 was pretty lumpy, although aerodynamically it was pretty clean. So, 21st of August 2010, the Mark III went onto my car. It followed the Mark II, which made the papers in June 2009, when I fitted the second prototype 20 watt SunFoil to my son's car for his 20th birthday. It proved to be slightly too small, and it only saves 4.2 litres a week. And after 2.5 years of driving one of the most advanced vehicles on the planet, he's actually going to sell it and trade it in and buy himself a turbocharged diesel 4-door 4-wheel drive Rodeo. So shortly there will in fact be one SunFoil equipped hybrid vehicle for sale, and then we'll get to find out what happens when we put a solar panel on a turbocharged diesel, because we've extracted about as much information as we can on the effect of the SunFoil on the Brumby, as well as keeping obsessive notes about the fuel consumption. When I put the Mark III up, I started an engine logbook, and so for a year I logged the cloud conditions, the start and shutdown time, the number of engine starts per day, come up with a figure for the average engine run time, the average number of startups per week, as well as getting up half an hour before sunrise every morning and measuring the air temperature and the battery voltage and how much power was coming out of the solar panel, and therefore working out how much current it took to trigger the regulator every day, and thus and because get some idea of the battery's storage efficiency. One of the pleasant surprises was that 3 months after I fitted the third prototype to my vehicle, a friend of mine who's an old Scottish carpenter on the nearby Alternative lifestyle community spent 22 months watching me, and he finally couldn't convince himself that there was any reason not to do it. So he bought himself a solar panel and 6 bits of wood, and he fed and mounted a 30 watt solar panel onto his V6 Holden Commodore. Now his car has got a 120 amp alternator at 3:1 step-up ratio, so his electrical system is capable of sucking 30 horsepower out of his crankshaft. So if his battery is 25% flat, he was used to putting 7 horsepower into the drive belt, and he now nearly has to fit a neck brace to cope with the gear changes going up the hills, because it's an automatic. His fuel gauge is broken, or his odd meter's broken, or that's right, his odd meter's broken. So he can't give me a fuel reading, but he says he really notices the extra torque from having a full battery. So in answer to the frequently asked question, is the solar panel driving the car? No, not as such, but it's stopping the car from wasting fuel, and it's giving it more power to drive itself with. More torque type power, if you know what I mean. So the other frequently asked question is, will it save enough power to matter? And the answer is yeah, of course it will. If you've got a brand new V6 Commodore and it's got central locking and it's got its alarm on, you're currently putting 10.5 or 10.3 amp hours per day into that battery, and you're looking at 22 litres a week that you could save with a 75 watt panel on the roof of the car. 22 litres a week, right? Well over 1,000 litres a year. So it'll buy itself in the first 6 months, and after that it just pays your rego. So if you want to take a long, hard, serious look at all of the raw data, search SunFoil Science. Okay, that's the clip for you. If you want to know how to measure your vehicle for a SunFoil, search SunFoil Short Torque. That one's got the CSIRO evaluation, Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organisation, official arm of the Australian Government. If you want to know about the aerodynamics, search Solar Thermal Ramjet, or look at the construction clip for the Mark III SunFoil. This is all open source, it's been published, it cannot be patented. Do it yourself, clean up your act, please. It's the single simplest, lowest hanging, ripest fruit on the alternative energy tree.